Well, hello and welcome back to Principles of Macroeconomics. I am your host, Dr. B. Happy to have you with us today as we talk about measuring the cost of living, which is a very important concept to understand because we explore the cost of goods and services as they continue to rise due to inflation and other pressures that are faced within the economy. When we talk about the cost of living, it's important to understand what we call the Consumer Price Index, which is a tool that we use to measure the overall level of prices as they change within the economy. We also measure the overall cost of goods and services based off of typical consumer behavior. What we mean by this is we look at goods and services that are typically purchased or consumed by consumers within a given year. We use the Consumer Price Index to compute and record the information based off the index every single month, and it's tracked by the Bureau of Labor and Statistics. It is a very important figure in order to understand how quickly goods and services, how quickly the price is rising. So in order to calculate the consumer price index, we first need to look at the range of prices for goods and services and apply a weight for these goods and services. The second thing we do to calculate the consumer price index is to find the prices for each of these items at certain points in time. This helps us to, of course, identify the changes in the prices from day to day, month to month. And then, of course, we compute the cost by examining the same goods and services and isolate the effects of these changes from month to month. The fourth thing we do to calculate the consumer price index is we select a base year, which is typically a point in time that may be 2 years ago or might be 3 years ago, depending on the range of data that you're calculating. So the base year is usually the first year of data that we have. And we use the base year as a benchmark, which is then used to understand the prices of the goods and services that we're looking at within that current year. We then divide the price of the goods and services in the current year. We divide that by the base year and then multiply by 100. And we've seen this type of calculation before when we try to understand the percent change. And then the fifth thing that we do in calculating the consumer price index is we compute the inflation rate. And the way to do that is we take the consumer price index in year 2 minus the consumer price index in year 1, which is also known as the base year, divided by the consumer price index in the base year or year 1. And then we multiply that by 100. That gets us the inflation rate for year 2. So let's take a look at this using an example. Here we have two products, goods that we're looking at, hot dogs and hamburgers. And we are going to apply the consumer price index to this example. So here we have 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers, which equal our total goods in our basket. The second step, of course, is to find the price of the goods for each year. So here we have the data for 2019, 2020, and 2021. Hot dogs were $1, $2, and $3 respectively. And we also see a similar trend for hamburgers. 2019 was $2, 2020 at $3, and 2024 is $4. So now that we have the range of data, we now go to calculate the cost for the goods that we have available for each year. So in each year, we have 4 hot dogs and 2 hamburgers. So we apply the cost accordingly. And the way we do that is we take the price in that year and we multiply that by the number of units. So for example, for hot dogs, it's $1 times 4 of them, so that would be 4. And then hamburgers was $2, and then we have 2 of them, so that would also be 4. Then we add 4 plus 4, and we get $8 per basket in 2019. In 2020, the price of hot dogs was $2, and we have 4 of them, so that's 8. Plus, the hamburgers was $3, and we have 2 of them, that's 6, giving us a total of 14 for 2020. And then we do this same application for 2021. We take the price at the time, $3, times the number of units, in this case 4, plus the price per hamburgers times the number of units, in this case 2, giving us a total of 20. So now we have our cost. We then move on to step 4, which is we select the base year, in this example 2019, because it is the first year available. And we compute the consumer price index for each year. So for 2019, it would be 8 over 8 times 100, which gives us 100. 2020, we take the 2020 cost divided by the base year of 8. 100 gives us 175. And then for 2021, the cost was $20 divided by the base year of 8 times 100, it gives us to 250. And then, of course, the last step in the process is to calculate the inflation rate based off the previous year. And so for 2020, we would take the 2020 Consumer Price Index minus the prior year, which is 100, and we divide that by the prior year, which is 100, and then we multiply by 100 to get 75%. And for 2021, we take the 2021 CPI minus the prior year CPI divided by the prior year CPI times 100 gets us to 43% for 2021. So this is how we calculate consumer price index. Now, why is it important to understand the changes in price of goods and services, you might be wondering? Well, of course, one of those is so we can better understand the inflation rate from year to year. A healthy inflation rate is about 2 or 3% every year. That means the prices of goods and services normally rise about 2 to 3% every single year. That's normal for an economy that's stable. However, as you have probably noticed, from 2020 to 2023, we've been experiencing higher than normal inflation rates. And that is because of a lot of constraints within the economy. We have a constrained number of goods and services available, which led to, of course, higher prices, higher wages, led to higher prices. A couple of major factors at play when understanding the cause and effect of inflation. So this information helps us to understand the inflation rate, but it also helps us to understand what the core consumer price index is. And the core consumer price index is a measure of all the overall cost of goods and services, except for food and energy. The reason why we exclude food and energy from the core consumer price index is because food and energy are very volatile goods and services that change on a very regular basis. And so with shifts in food and energy, it's best to understand that we need to exclude those things when measuring the core consumer price index in order to get the real changes in price. Now, we have an understanding of the consumer price index. We also measure what we call the producer price index. And this measures the cost of the goods and services that are being purchased or manufactured by the companies. Okay. The changes in the producer price index are useful when predicting the changes that might happen in the consumer price index. Because as you know, with business, one of the most common things is that the manufacturers or the companies oftentimes pass along the added cost to the consumer. So here we have a normal basket of goods and services. We have transportation, housing, food and beverage, medical care, education and communication, recreation, apparel, which is clothing, and then, of course, other goods and services. Now, this is representative of the total consumer price index. But as we had just discussed, if you want to find the core consumer price index, we would exclude things like food and beverage and transportation because of the energy costs. Now, one of the trouble some parts of looking at consumer price index to understand the cost of living is that there are some biases that come into play, and especially with the exclusion of um, energy and uh, food. With the exclusion of those things and measuring the real consumer price index or a core consumer price index, is that it's not really reflective of those changes. So oftentimes, in order to establish a real consumer price index, we oftentimes utilize the gross domestic product deflator that we talked about briefly in previous chapters. And so the way we utilize the gross domestic product deflator is we take the ratio of nominal gross domestic product and we compare that to the real gross domestic product. This does reflect the changes in prices of goods and services that are produced domestically. And in comparison to the consumer price index, it's reflective of the prices of goods and services that are purchased by consumers. The gross domestic product deflator looks at the price of currently produced goods and services, and that we compare those to the base year, whereas a consumer price index looks at these goods and services in terms of a basket compared to the base year. In measuring something like inflation, whether you're using the gross domestic product deflator or the consumer price index, it's important to understand that there are primary differences between those two units of measure. However, they are relatively similar in nature. You'll notice looking at this graph that the consumer price index has more volatile shifts when it comes to measuring the changes. However, if you use the um, real or core consumer price index, it tends to be a little bit closer to the gross domestic product deflator measure. So, how do we correct for such economic variables to better understand the consumer price index? One of those is to figure out the amount of times that the prices change in relative relation to the value of the dollar. And the way that we do that is by utilizing the present value of money formula. The present value of money formula is very commonly used to understand how much a dollar is worth in today's terms, how much will be in the future. And so, a very simple way of looking at that is the value of today's dollar is equal to the amount of dollars in year T, to year time, some point in the future. And we multiply that by the price level today divided by the price level in the future. And so that helps us to understand the time value of money strain. And of course, when we look at the price index in relation to consumer price index, we look at this as a measure of the price levels, which of course determines the size of the inflation correction. These measures really help to control inflation. That's why you'll notice that over the past few years, there has been an increase in the rates of borrowing, also known as the interest rates. And the interest rates going up is a way to deter individuals from pumping more money into circulation for various things. It helps to slow down the economy, which is the aim to reduce inflation. Now, of course, there are regional differences across the country when it comes to understanding the cost of living. For example, it is always much more expensive to live in a larger city. Here in the District of Columbia, we are one of the most expensive places in the United States to live. And this is relative to the cost of living in New York City and also in Hawaii, which are the geographically speaking, those are the most expensive places in the United States to live because the cost of living is so high there. That includes things we take into consideration things like rent, cost of food, cost of transportation, etc. So here's a nice graphical representation of that. If you look at the price parity by state, of course, Hawaii is the highest because everything is shipped in, the cost of energy is much higher, cost of rent is much higher. Then the District of Columbia would be a close second. I also think New York would be a close second. And then, of course, by state, California, New Jersey, Maryland, Connecticut, all of these, of course, being the most expensive states in the nation. So why do these regional differences exist? Of course, the difference in goods and services available in those regions are significantly different. Of course, housing is one of the biggest drivers of cost, as you know. So that's why we index things. It's important to help us to understand the cost of living is by indexing. When we index something, we put it into a chart and we use it as a way for us to understand the cost of living as a factor based off of things like the interest rates. And of course, as you know, interest rates are what we use to control things like inflation. The higher the interest rates, usually the lower inflation. That's what normally is supposed to happen. But this year, 2023, has kind of proven a little bit different for us, I believe. So the nominal interest rate, and this is kind of review for us, we've talked about these things before. Nominal interest rate looks at the interest rate that's usually reported as without corrections based off of inflation. The real interest rates are corrected for inflation. So why do we look at nominal interest rates and real rates, and why do we look at the inflation overall? Well, because the inflation is really what drives changes in prices for goods and services. and it's important for us to be able to understand how to get that back under control. And of course, this graph kind of sums that up for us. Okay, so thank you very much for your time in this discussion. I do want to call your attention to the classroom and discuss what is happening. We're going to start on the next discussion for the next chapter, but I also want to remind you that there is a hypothesis video, hypothesis for this week. And then, of course, there is a quiz on chapters 11 and 12, and we also have the midterm exam. And we will review the midterm exam here shortly. So thank you so much for your time, and please stand by. We're going to go ahead and switch gears now.